Well, the first day of summer certainly started off with a bang in Iran. Talk about truth bombs. There's not a single person who could be surprised by the U.S. strike against Iran's nuke sites. Trump's been saying for decades that the terror state can never be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. Even the communist Dems agree that Iran is a terror state that exports their terror through mostly proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, to name a few. Proof of the fear Iran has introduced into the Middle East is how no other Arab nation has spoken up in support of Iran. The Ayatollah, as part of a crazy ambition to thrust Islam all over the globe as the world religion, is merely following what's laid out in the Quran. Just as Islam swept across the entire Mediterranean world in the 7th century, beheading tens of thousands of Catholics along the way, so too today, the followers of Islam are bent on destruction of Catholic-built Western civilization. Why would anyone think anything has changed? Since the Quran can be read and interpreted in two different manners, Shia versus Sunni, and importantly, there is no final authority in the religion that leaves a huge vacuum of leadership. In fact, one of the chief differences between these two distinct branches of Islam is who is seen as the political governing force. For Shiites, it's the Ayatollah, a supreme final authority leader. For the Sunnis, it's imams, collectively. Sunnis are a bit more, shall we say, open to dealing with the West as far as that goes. The most recent example being the tremendous official state welcome President Trump was given in various Islamic countries during his visits, including the traditional hair dance. It was quite the sight for all of that to be rolled out for an American president. That would never happen in Shiite-dominated countries. While both branches agree largely on their theological views, which mostly reject human rights based on underlying Catholic principles related back to natural law, the major difference is in application. The Sunnis are somewhat more laid back, you could say, about expanding Islam, while the Shiites track more closely with the methods of Muhammad himself, which is violence, mayhem, and murder. Their interpretation of jihad. Iran is a Shiite state, and in order to pursue their jihad, they fund and sponsor proxy groups to carry out jihad. Groups, again, like Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis. Back in the day, it was the PLO, Yasser Arafat, and the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Prior to the 1950s, Iran had been under British control stretching back for decades, and the country's vast oil supply was the focus. Then a revolution occurred, which the U.S. and British opposed, and then led them to clandestinely install the Shah as the leader. Being backed and supported by Western nations, the Shah was always on somewhat questionable footing with his people, and as he began crackdowns on opposition, it ultimately resulted in his overthrow by the Ayatollah Khomeini in early 1979. Later in that same year, the Shiite mobs, led by Khomeini, attacked the U.S. Embassy and took eventually 52 Americans as hostages for the next 444 days. These last events occurred while Jimmy Carter was president and were largely responsible for the 1980 election landslide loss that he experienced to Ronald Reagan, who warned the Ayatollah the hostages had better be freed by the day he was inaugurated, or he would make Iran a parking lot. They were freed on January 20th. In 1983, this happened to be my very first day in news, Iran ordered a massive suicide bombing of the U.S. Marine compound in Beirut, which killed more than 200 U.S. Marines. That's a brief sketch of how we got to where we are today. At root, it's a long, ongoing conflict over Islamic theology and how it's applied. The so-called religion of peace approach versus the Shiite jihad approach. After their 36-hour mission as those B-2 bombers, God bless those guys, holy Moses, what a mission, they returned safely to the U.S. Trump bombed the Shiite jihad radicals to make sure they couldn't expand Islam through threats of force with nuclear weapons. This is a jihad that, at its core, has been waged against the Catholic West all the way back to Islam's beginnings. Vast swaths of the Middle East, as well as all of North Africa, were Catholic until Islam came around and, well, killed them. and installed what amounted to Shiite Islam. They went far into Europe, through Spain and up into France, until being driven out of France by Catholic monarch Charles Martel at the Battle of Tours in 732. It was Catholic Ferdinand and Isabella who in the 16th century drove them out of what became a united Spain. Even today in Western Europe, vast hordes of so-called immigrants are Muslims overrunning formerly Catholic nations, bent on making Islam victorious through their sheer numbers. Even though all of this is history, all of this might be lost on many Westerners who are today more pagan than Catholic, it is not lost on Shiite Islamists. Failure to understand this would be a costly mistake. Coming to you from Houston, Texas, I'm Gary Michael Voris. God love you.